Good day, everyone. On behalf of the Bureau of Justice Assistance, let me welcome you to the Body-worn Camera Technical Assistance webinar on the past, present, and future of body-worn cameras. My name is Chip Coldren. I'm the Director of the CNA Center for Justice Research and Innovation, the Director of Technical Assistance for the Bureau of Justice Assistance's Body-worn Camera Technical Assistance Program, and I will briefly cue things up for today's webinar. The agenda for today's webinar begins with a stage-setting presentation by Kristen Mahoney, the Acting Director of the Bureau of Justice Assistance. Thank you very much, Kristen. She will be followed by Dr. Michael White from Arizona State University, who will provide a brief review of the social context that gave rise to BJA's Body-worn Camera Technical Assistance Program and the evolving research on body-worn cameras. Next, Dr. Craig Wichita, President of Justice and Security Strategies, will facilitate a panel discussion with three very knowledgeable and seasoned representatives from our body-worn camera grantees. They include Chief Michael Moore from the Los Angeles Police Department, Chief Gordon Ramsey from the Wichita Police Department, and Nick Murphy, representing the Regional Justice Information System based in St. Louis. Before we begin, please permit me a couple other comments. This webinar is recorded for the benefit of others who may view it later on the Technical Assistance website. There will be opportunities for questions and participation toward the end of the webinar. Please use the chat utility to pose your questions and thoughts, and we'll do our best to respond to your input. Following the webinar, you'll receive a request to evaluate it. We ask that you please complete this evaluation and give us your honest thoughts and recommendations. And now, Kristen, please start us off.
Thanks, Chip. Good afternoon. I'm Kristen Mahoney, and I'm the Acting Director at the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and welcome to the webinar. Our body-worn camera program started back in 2015 when there was a national call for action as a result of several things. Some officer-involved shootings, critical incidents. These events, as you may recall, gave rise to the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing, which informed and spurred our body-worn camera grant program. This program supports the acquisition of body-worn cameras by state, local, tribal law enforcement. But it was important to us that we weren't just an equipment purchase program. We wanted to be a very deliberate program that was comprehensive and helped our grantees figure out how to purchase, deploy, and sustain an evidence-based body-worn camera program that improved their outcomes for all of their stakeholders. It was designed to be data-driven, evidence-based, and to evolve. So back in 2015, when you look at our map, when we first started, we were able to fund 73 sites for $21 million in these areas. We also decided to invest in a training and technical assistance initiative. I think this is really important. It's not just funding our sites, but it's also building the model and building the practice for the country, identifying best practices and building a community of practice among grantee agencies, their criminal justice partners, their defense attorneys, their prosecutors, and working together to advance the field and make the best use of body-worn cameras for law enforcement and public safety. We work with CNA, and we also have been working with Arizona State and Justice and Security Strategies. So you're going to hear from them a little later on. We've been doing this for about 6 years. You can see the cumulative funding here on the chart, where we've gone from a total of, starting back in 2015 with 73 awards. We've now invested in about 6 years worth of funding, 7 years worth of funding for 460 awards for $96 million, and that's 81,000 body-worn cameras. One thing that we're doing in 2020 that you're going to see happen this year is we invested it in 2020, and it'll be implemented in 2021, which is a $10.5 million set aside for small rural and tribal agencies to access these funds without the amount of red tape, if you will, that goes with a larger grant award. We're hoping that these are fast-tracked awards for small rural and tribal agencies, and we look forward to developing that cohort and bringing that community of practice along as well. So this micro grant program that I talked about, that's going to enable our smaller agencies to not have the same administrative grant burdens that the larger agencies might. I know the larger agencies are thinking, hey, how do we get in on the micro grant solicitation? But sorry, this is just for small rural and small tribal agencies. And we hope to launch the micro grant program later this spring, maybe sometime in May. So keep an eye out for that if you consider your agency to be a small or rural agency. We'll also be launching a larger, our regular body-worn camera program as well. And this is our cumulative footprint of all of the different places that we're working right now. And of course, the training and technical assistance that we talk about, that you'll hear about, it's so important because it enables us to have peers or subject matter experts just parachute in to your community, connect you with people that are doing what you do, and help you expedite your progress. We've seen a lot of different programs through the years as we've been working with this initiative. We've seen deploying them to all of the sworn personnel. We've seen deploying just to patrol officers, or we've seen deploying to officers who happen to have regular contact with the public. We don't have a prescription on how you implement your program. We expect you to determine what works best for your agency. We try and set up things like our body-worn camera toolkit and our training and technical assistance providers to help you develop the program and apply for the program. We've seen pilot programs, we've seen expansion programs, and in some instances, we've seen multi-year awards. That is, we have funded the pilot, and then we have expanded it with subsequent grants after that. We also fund all sorts of different agencies. People ask me routinely, do you fund universities? Do you fund corrections agencies? This is an area of growth for us. We're looking forward to being able to fund the more and more correctional agencies. We're looking at school, we're looking at consortia. Sometimes some consortia come together and it's easier for a group of agencies within a small and rural area to apply together with one lead. We've also funded some transportation police agencies. So you can see that we have a variety of different agency types that are supported. And of course, we do offer the training and technical assistance that's customized to support those agencies' needs. So looking forward, our team works with the researchers that you're going to hear from today. We are hearing about the use of body-worn cameras to help with training and improving the training and on the use of force. We've also been working with and helping states comply with their state or local legislation regarding body-worn camera and digital media. We've been helping, we do a lot of work with prosecutors in defense and the courts regarding the tsunami of digital evidence media that you all are experiencing. We are working to see how we can enhance body-worn cameras for training to help you work in the area of policy compliance and also in the areas of public relations and upkeep. So finally, we're going to be refining these practices as those listed here. We're going to be training and continuing to develop these resources. But all of that work is done on the backs of the researchers and the practitioners that you're hearing from today. We consume everything we can from the practitioners and the researchers, and we redirect and we evolve. We're looking forward to continuing to serve this community. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these remarks, and I hope you enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Kristen. I'm gonna stick with the past, present, and future framework. Again, my name is Mike White from Arizona State University. I'm also the co-director of the TTA team. I want to use that past, present, future framework to emphasize two themes. First is the important role of research, and second is the important role of policy. And so let's go back in time a little bit. And so if we go back, say, 6 years, in December of 2014, President Obama gave a speech at the White House. And as I said, this was December of 14, so it was, on the heels of the summer of 2014, Michael Brown's death in Ferguson. And President Obama at that speech did a couple of important things. One, he announced the formation of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing that Director Mahoney had referenced. But I think more relevant for us today, the other thing he did, it was at this speech that he made the pledge of up to $75 million for the purchase of 50,000 body-worn cameras throughout the United States. And really, it was that pledge that was the genesis of the PIP program and what we do with TTA. So in the months following that speech and that pledge, BJA was tasked with kind of building this program. And so one of the things BJA had to do was to figure out what it is we know about body-worn cameras and what do we not know. And one of the first things they did, as you can see from the slide, is they organized what was called an expert panel in late February 2015. And myself and Professor Chuck Katz from ASU, we facilitated this panel. Essentially what they did is lock in a room over 100 really smart people. That included some police leaders, it included other stakeholders like representatives from the ACLU, prosecutors, defense. And essentially we had a giant brainstorming session trying to figure out the answer to that question of what we know about body cameras. And as that expert panel ended, myself, Professor Katz, and folks at BJA then took all of the content, all the information that we had learned from the expert panel and used that to build the BJA's National Body-Worn Camera Toolkit. And the toolkit went live in May of 2015. It's an information warehouse. It's regularly updated. It's where anyone can go to find out what it is we do know about this technology, whether you're a chief of police, whether you're a civil rights attorney, a concerned citizen, a police officer. It's the place to go, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it. So that was the first part of the past that I wanted to focus on. The second part is the research base. So if you think about 2015, here we have thousands of police departments across the US moving in this direction of very quickly adopting body-worn cameras. At the same time, BJA is trying to build this PIP program. And when you think about what we knew in terms of research at that time when this was happening, the answer is we didn't know a whole lot at all. Really, there were only 5 studies that had been completed. A couple were from overseas. Several were not very strong methodologically. So there wasn't a whole lot that we did know. Yet it was clear that the body-worn camera train was leaving the station. As I said, thousands of departments were adopting technology, and the researchers, we really needed to make sure we jumped on that moving train so that we could provide some evidence to facilitate and to help departments as they make these decisions about the technology. And as we think back to that, how that evidence base was built, what was clear is that the early research was almost universally positive. If you've been in this space at all, you've probably heard of Rialto, California. It was one of the first studies that came out. It reported really dramatic reductions in use of force and complaints following the adoption of cameras. And there were some other studies that came out as well in 2014 and 15 that were very, very positive in terms of the impact. But what happened is over time, the research became more mixed. I remember being at IACP in 2017, I believe it was in Philadelphia, and the researchers were presenting their findings from the study in Washington, D.C. with the Metropolitan Police. And as you can see from the quote on the slide, they reported no difference at all in terms of impact on complaints and use of force. And I remember a lot of people were really stunned by that. How could it be that you could have, on the one hand, results from Rialto and Phoenix and Mesa that were so very positive, and then a study like this documents no impact. And I think about those two studies as kind of the bookends of the evidence base, DC Metro on one side and Rialto on the other. So if we think about, okay, let's flash forward then to 2021, what do we know? And now we have over 100 studies that have been completed. I think we know a whole lot. We've learned a lot. As I said, the researchers really we upped our game and were able to build an evidence base fairly quickly. And the evidence base is focused on a lot of outcomes. Researchers have looked at procedural justice and legitimacy and evidentiary value. But I think still the two big ticket items that a lot of people focus on are the impact on use of force and complaints. So here on this slide, you see on the left those numbers that I was talking about with Rialto, the really dramatic declines. But as I said, over time, the evidence base has gotten more mixed. So Milwaukee, for example, a study published a year ago, they saw a reduction in complaints, but no change in use of force. So I think what's been frustrating as we think about where we are in the present is that, the sometimes contradictory findings, particularly with regard to these two big ticket items. So one of the things that we've done as part of the TTA team is to create what we call outcome directories that are very user-friendly products that summarize all of the research on a given topic. And you can see the link on this slide. So for example, there are 26 studies now that have looked at the impact of body-worn cameras on complaints. 20 of the 26 have documented substantial or statistically significant declines. So these resources, and you can see the numbers for use of force, these are designed to help both the researchers and policymakers and practitioners kind of keep a handle on the research as it's coming out, so we can stay on top of things, so we can understand what the body of evidence is telling us as a whole. The other issue I wanted to talk about in terms of the present is the importance of administrative policy. And if you're familiar at all with the PIP program and the TTA work we do, administrative policy is a centerpiece of that work. And our guiding principle really is that we believe that good body-worn camera policy will lead to good body-worn camera practice. And we've developed a robust policy review process that addresses all the issues that you see on this slide, and it's designed to adhere to that philosophy of having a good body-worn camera policy. And we anchored this principle in a large body of evidence going over 5, even 6 decades that shows us the importance of administrative rulemaking, of administrative policy and policing. All of that research has shown us across a wide range of behaviors, use of force, pursuits, of use of canine, arrests, administrative policy matters. It's not often that someone in my line of work gets to use the F word, and not the F word you're thinking of. I'm thinking of the F word meaning a fact. And we have the evidence in this area, I think, is so strong that we can use that term. If you have an administrative policy that is clear, that is understood by the officers, and that is enforced, that policy will effectively guide officer decision-making. We know that with regard to use of force and pursuits, and we believe it to be the case with body-worn cameras as well. So that's why we have policy as the centerpiece. Next slide. Just a point on looking forward in terms of the future. And this goes directly to that point about some of the inconsistencies in research findings. And I think we need to continue as we move forward. We need to acknowledge the importance of local context, and local context is important not only for policy and for practice in this area, but also for understanding research. And you see the image, gratuitous book plug here, of a book I published last year with colleague Ali Malm, and that's the centerpiece of the book, is that local context matters. We shouldn't be asking general questions like, do body cameras work? Should all agencies release their footage within X number of days? Those kinds of general questions miss the point. And the point is that, there's not one body-worn camera story. Think about the bookends I mentioned. You got Rialto, and you've got DC Metro, and you got everything in between. And we're going to hear about a couple of stories today from LAPD, from some folks in St. Louis, and from Wichita. So I think we just need to keep that, that framework in mind, that local context matters. What works for the LAPD may not necessarily work for Wichita or Tempe, Arizona. And we need to keep that in mind with regard to some of the questions about policy, some of the questions about practice, as well as the research. So those are my thoughts. I think now I'll kick it over to Craig Wichita, who's going to lead the next part of the webinar.
Great, thanks, Mike. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I have the pleasure of facilitating a question and answer session with three people, with Chief Michael Moore from the Los Angeles Police Department, Chief Gordon Ramsey from the Wichita, Kansas Police Department, and Mr. Nick Murphy from the REJIS, all of whom represent different facets, I think, and different types of organizations that currently make use of body-worn cameras. And I want to follow up with Mike's comments that yes, and they have different ways of implementation and different ways of doing things. And we're going to hear a lot about that in terms of their past practices, their present practices, and their future issues and future things that they would like to see happen. Before we get into the Q&A, though, I would like to have each of our panelists just introduce themselves briefly, tell us who you are, how long you've been with the department, and tell us a little bit about your police agency as well. So Chief Moore, if you would start off, please, I'd appreciate it.
Absolutely, Doctor. Let me first thank Craig Cauldron, as well as Director Christian Mahoney, BJA, of course, yourself, the opportunity to be here today and talk with the as a panelist. I welcome that, as well as to hear Chief Ramsey, as well as the insight and recommendations of Nicholas Murphy. You know, for us, LAPD is an agency of about 12,500 sworn and civilian personnel. We police a city of 4 million, second largest city in the country, and third largest police agency in America. We are, this is my 40th year as a member of the organization. I came in the organization as a police officer, worked my way up through the ranks, and I'm approaching my third year as the chief. And our experience with body-worn video cameras, as well as the establishment of it, it's used across the organization. Some 7,000 devices that are out there today, paired with telephones, and I believe it's had a fundamental shift and influence and change on our culture for the better, as well as our relationship, our transparency with the public in which we serve. So I look forward to our conversation today and learning and hearing from others as well.
Thanks, Chief. Chief Ramsey.
Good afternoon. I'll echo Chief Moore's gratitude. Thank you for the opportunity. Nice to see everybody today. Wichita is a city of about 400,000 people. We have 450 body cameras out among our officers. We purchased them and went all patrol in 2016. We started testing them in 2013. BJA has been a good partner for us, and we have received hundreds of thousands of dollars in grant money, and appreciate the grant opportunities that have come our way, and it's definitely helped our agency move forward. They've been tremendous for us in so many different ways. We had an officer involved shooting last week that before we knew it, some tweets had gone out that we had shot an unarmed individual, and fortunately the body camera clearly showed otherwise, and it was able to slow that social media train down very quickly. We see time and time again where it helps us resolve conflicts with the community and share what really happened. So from our perspective, it has been worth every penny. We continue to see it evolve. You know, we have a lot of opportunities today with different auditing of the camera systems that we're looking at as well. But from our perspective, it has been a very valuable tool for us. Probably the most valuable tool for me in my professional career.
Wow. Okay. Thank you, Chief. Nick Murphy, how you doing, sir?
Not too bad. Thanks, Dr. Wichita, for letting me have the opportunity to come on here and speak about our experiences. So my name is Nick Murphy, and I am the project manager for the body-worn camera grants at the Regional Justice Information Service Commission. A lot easier just to say REJIS, so that's what I'll refer to my company from here on out. We are an IT firm based here in St. Louis. We provide several web applications and data security for a variety of criminal justice agencies in our area. That includes customers in states in Illinois and Kansas, but we're mostly based here in St. Louis. And we have so far been awarded 2 body-worn camera grants. The first one was in 2017 with a $435,000 reward. And this past October, we were awarded an additional grant with new agencies for about $270,000. We are a little bit unique, as Kristen kind of touched on earlier. We are the one or very few individuals to do the consortia type of grant, where we have partnered with multiple local police departments here in St. Louis County that are more smaller. In 2017, we have partnered with 7 police departments, and for 2020, we partnered with 5. And the reason we have to do that is due to a kind of a unique government structure here in St. Louis. The St. Louis City and St. Louis County are 2 separate governmental entities, meaning that really the city police has the jurisdiction in the city, and the county, for the county as well. But within St. Louis County, we have 88 different municipalities. 58 of those have their own police force. So what that results in is a lot of small police departments here in our area. So we have focused on efforts to get this body-worn camera grant money and to help out our smaller police departments in this area. And so far, through the 2017 grant, we have purchased 221 cameras. Our largest agency of the 7 purchased 50, and our smallest was 16. My experiences are going to be a little bit different than Chief Moore and Chief Ramsey, just because of the size of our individual departments. But I'm excited to share our experiences and hear what others have to say as well.
Terrific, thank you. So what I'd like to do is talk about the experiences you had when you first thought about and even started to purchase cameras. What kinds of experiences you had in either testing them or rolling them out, or just implementation of them. So I would like to start with Chief Moore. Why don't you start with LA?
Thank you, Craig. So we'll frame this that we initially started off with a police foundation, a private philanthropic group, supported $1 million contribution to the department to begin our initial investment in body-worn cameras for uniformed officers working patrol, much as Chief Ramsey indicated for Wichita. That was back in 2014. Then we received a generous grant from BJA in 2015 of $1 million. That was followed by 700,000, just over 750,000, I believe, in 2017. That was a rollout. Our initial plan was to pilot. We did go with Axiom at the time, and then we did an RFP to allow the entire industry to compete for the contract, if you will. We eventually chose the Axiom group, and we just entered into a new 5-year agreement with them. We built this from the ground up, recognizing that this was going to be an enterprise-wide solution, meaning that we wanted a workforce of 21 different stations across 465 square miles, that the individual officers that would work out of those stations in a uniform capacity would have their own device, and that it would be tethered to them throughout their watch. And we, of course, developed policies and protocols for that, personal use, private communications, appropriate times with critical instances for the body-worn to be on, as well as turning it off, storage. And then as far as the maintenance of it, these are devices that have batteries that have, they have their own lifeline that they have to gather the data and store it. Of course, in a distributed system such as ourselves, the IT structure of this was significant. It involved a significant investment of building out just to ensure we have electrical. Many of our stations are 30 to 40 years of age, and the electrical requirements, the logistics of racking these devices involved close communications and really product designs for the development of body-worn cameras. When you think about what the capabilities are today versus where they were 5 or 6 years ago. And we've worked closely with the industry for lessons learned. The buffering of the device, the battery life of the device, the docking, the recovery upload. Those are all matters that have come from field testing and use of these, and what we've, and then of course the cultural shift, working with our men and women, working with our labor to have the rules of engagement, the rules of use, consequences for failing to use the device. These are all been, it's been a road that I believe we've dug in deeply to be invested in. The cost of a body-worn system for an agency of our size is significant, both in time and in energy and in focus. But again, we believe that it's making tremendous strides in building community trust, building accountability, as well as improving the officers' performance and their ability to prevail in court, and when their conduct is challenged, that it's a safety net, much like a bulletproof vest is, or a ballistic vest. Not perfect, won't stop everything, but it certainly goes a long way for officer safety by having it present.
Thank you, Chief. Chief Ramsey, what happened with Wichita? I know you were an early user of body-worn cameras, as I recall. So walk us through what you did.
Testing in the early days, the battery life was an issue, 2013, 2012. The battery life just wasn't there, and the quality of the camera wasn't as well. We ultimately went fully implemented all the cameras in 2016. One of our struggles was the policy development. A lot of stakeholders, as was mentioned, came to the table to help us develop that, but there was many opinions, broad-ranging opinions, that we had to work through to develop that policy, as well as it was still in 2016 very fluid, very still evolving. And funny enough, today the policies are still evolving. It seems that every month there's a new issue on related to something with body-worn cameras that we need to quickly pivot and get ahead of. The policy development was probably one of the bigger issues for me as the chief, and as I mentioned, that it's still evolving every day here. The other big issue to keep in mind is that there was a number of expenses that we didn't anticipate. We chose the cameras that were mounted on the head after trying out the various types. That involved different types of items to attach them to a hat or attach them to sunglasses. Just a lot of little integral parts of the process that we hadn't considered early on.
Okay.
So for us, there was the policy development, the expenses were a couple of the big things that I wish we had started a little earlier on in the process.
Okay. Nick, I know you have to deal with multiple police agencies, so that must also be a challenge just in balancing out those agencies and their needs. Tell us what you've been doing with them.
So one of the biggest issues that we had after we completed the RFP and after our partner agencies have decided to purchase the Panasonic product, one of the biggest things, just because we had so many officers over so many departments, was really just purchasing the right accessories for each officer and their preference. One of the things that limited us or challenged us with such a small officer headcount, our budgets were a little bit more limited than you might see in bigger departments. So, we had to really prioritize some accessories over the others. And this mostly came into an issue with mounting accessories. And just because, as I mentioned, we're a bit of a unique setup. Each time we did an RFP, our vendors weren't sending 200 cameras and 200 accessories to everybody just to see what they thought. It was a pretty limited sample that we were able to obtain and send to our partner agencies to see what they liked and what they did not. And, at the end of the day, when we started getting into the purchasing process, we kind of realized that not all the officers were able to experiment with what they would prefer, what they, end up going subsequently after we deployed. So we had a lot of issues with, well, this officer likes the click fast mount on the center of the chest, or this officer wants the molly mount on top of the shoulder. There was just a lot of, I guess, kind of issues of, we just didn't have a lot of time in the RFP to really experiment and see what everybody wanted. So if we had to do it again, we would make sure that we're not going to get a bunch of cameras and equipment from the vendor during RFP. However, for our partner agencies moving forward, we're really going to emphasize, have all of your officers try stuff out, experiment a little bit, because the cameras are going to be here regardless. So you might as well be comfortable with it. And that way that our
Mhm.
agencies don't have to spend money outside of what they're allotted with the federal grant into purchasing additional accessories after the fact.
Okay. What about things like policies? Did the agencies agree to one policy, or how did that work? How did you get them to develop and or approve?
So our lead, we have a lead police agency here in our grant. His name is Chief Jeremy Eiler at Bell Fountain Neighbors. He served as the lead. He went to DC a couple years ago with the for the national convention, and he really took the spirit. He spearheaded the process of development policy according to the scorecard and just everything that went into that. And once his was approved and we looked it over, we sent it out to everyone to be really an inspiration about how they could go forth with their policies as well. So
Okay.
once we got done with the original first policy and we knew it was ready to go, the rest of the agencies in our group, it was pretty simple. We obviously want to emphasize that you should tailor it to yourself and not what our lead agency did.
Okay. Okay. Chief Moore, has the policy stayed the same within the LAPD over the last 6 years, or what's changed for you?
As this is a living evolution of body-worn video and how we use it. It's changed. It continues to change. It is something that we worked with labor to establishing when the device is carried, how it's activated, exceptions to that, and then also consequences when officers don't abide by the policy or fail to use the policy. And that's probably been the latest changes. Most recently, we've learned from other agencies. We were not the first to enter in this field, and we did a lot of research with how other agencies are using the device and learn from those and benefit. And we still do. We still look to other agencies. And the consequences that we're currently working on is that when an officer fails to utilize the device, to turn it on or deactivates it early, when over a course of cycles, over a course of weeks, months, and years, what are the consequences for that? What, as an agency, we release body-worn video on all critical instances, which would involve an officer-involved shooting and then custody death, or something that raises a great deal of public interest as to the actions of the department. So as you can imagine, it's really critical that the personnel that are there and have their body-worn videos on and wearing them, that their video be made available. We've had some instances over the last nearly 3 years where we release these video excerpts of well over 100 in this 3-year period, where we've had officers that have had late activation or their body-worn wasn't on.
Okay.
And it creates it creates a great deal of tension and criticism by the public, rightfully so. I reference it as the Nixon tapes, because you have this gap, you have this absence, and of course then people fill that in that the officers' actions were devious and were evil and were purposely that way.
Yeah.
Many times it was a simple mistake. So we've established auditing processes. We capture as an agency 14,000 video clips a day, and so we have an auditing process to go back and on a randomized basis audit for compliance with our standards. And the effort here is to have 5 nines of excellence, where officers become second nature and have that device activated as appropriate and use it as they should, much as they have their firearms and the other policies and other practices of how they go about their day. This is a learning process. Our policies have changed where now we give recruit officers in the academy, they carry body-worn videos so that they begin to incorporate the use of a body-worn rather than training in the academy and then going out to the field and then being introduced to a whole nother system of this monitoring and use in their police work. So the changes have occurred. I will say the vast majority, they're more finite now. They're more nuanced today than they were, say, 3 to 4 years ago. And I think that's just the continuation of a maturing process. But lastly, I'll say that I think that we still continue to look around agencies across major city chiefs as well as IACP and others to understand what their practices are. This has particularly been interesting to us for discipline, as to what are the consequences when an officer has a failure, and how significant is that, because we want to make sure that we're fair and recognizing that this is a process that an officer may engage in 10, 15, 20 times a day, may have success rates, again, like 5 nines, but only one failure. Oh, but it's a critical incident.
Yeah.
So what's fair and appropriate in that instance?
Okay. Chief Ramsey, I'm going to look to the present now, and I'm going to ask and we'll go to the next slide. But I'd like to talk about what the department is doing today, and in particular, how you're using footage today, and how it may be helping you in terms of whether it's investigations or training, or measuring police behavior. How does your agency now use footage that's available? And you must have a lot too, just as LAPD has.
Yeah, Craig, well, you hit on all of them, actually. I mean, the prosecutors love them, although it takes a lot of extra time on their part. And I would add that, if you're looking at body worn cameras, make sure you include your prosecutors in the process, as well as your public defenders. But, the criminal cases, obviously, they're a tremendous asset. From my perspective as the chief, it really helps me on complaint investigations. It is very handy just to be able to pull up, if I get a complaint, I can usually see the video within a few minutes if it was downloaded. So very helpful with complaint investigations, as well as the training function, where we see what our staff is actually doing out in the field, how they're using, are they de-escalating appropriately? Is there any tweaking of training modules that we have to make to help make sure that we're being responsive to what we're seeing out there? So the benefits are many in how we use it today.
Are you using the footage in training now? Is that part of the curriculum? Is that built in now, or?
Yeah, we're cautious on, we don't want to embarrass anybody or, throw anybody under the bus, so to speak, but we are using it more and more as examples. Staff is more comfortable with it, but you have to also keep in mind you're ensuring that your staff is comfortable with what we're showing.
Sure. Okay. And Nick, how are your smaller agencies using footage today? Is it for these kinds of things as well, or is there a difference, you think? Go ahead.
Chief Ramsey kind of stole my thunder a little bit because I was going to say the exact same things he did. We've encouraged our departments to use footage that they capture with the camera for training purposes. More so really when an officer shows example of area behavior in a stressful situation, more so. But they could also use, footage from an incident where someone could have done something better. But again, as Chief Ramsey said, it's tough to really throw somebody under the bus like that. But really the thing that we have seen the most is just the amount of citizen complaints and just the time it takes to deal with them. We're seeing it's so much easier now to dispel these complaints with the footage that the camera provides. I'll provide a quick story. We had one of our departments, their officer got a complaint that he was violently banging on a citizen's door and window. The major reviewed the footage, and it was a slight tapping. And these are just situations that have our department's just thrilled with having a body-worn camera in the program in the first place. Now you don't have to deal really with how the administrative headache of dealing with citizen complaints of officer behavior, especially if they're not substantiated. That's just the main thing that I've heard from our department since we deployed in June of 2020 of how much they enjoy the program.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chief Moore, I'm going to throw a different question to you in terms of the release of footage to the public. I know that's been an issue in the department for a while, but I know you've also released footage. And if you'd speak to that a little bit in terms of how that process works and what goes on with it.
I want anybody who's listening to this, if they go to lapdonline.com, you can see under the tab critical incident videos that these are instances involving officer-involved shooting or an in-custody death or other significant instance of police conduct and actions that draw public attention. What comes from that is it's also a policy that's developed these last 3 years by our Board of Police Commissioners, which is my bosses, civilians appointed by the mayor that oversee the department, essentially the board of directors. And they established a policy 3 years ago that within 45 days of what is defined as a critical incident, there's a set of criteria that we release relevant body-worn video as well as closed circuit camera captures. We have digital in-car videos in our police vehicles, and then other physical evidence as well as witness statements in a presentation that describes the the circumstances of how this became a critical incident. What were the actions as far as a radio call? What was the alleged actions involved? What was the officer's response? And then the aftermath. And we show then the relevant clips of body-worn video to provide perspective and insight as people look at these events. This critical incident video is not meant to make a pass judgment on the event. In fact, we clearly state in there that we are not making judgment, that this is preliminary information and is being released for the public's consumption for them to understand the facts and circumstances. The officers understand that these videos will be released. The imaging of the officers, members of the public are generally not masked unless they are a victim of a sexual crime or violent crime that has confidentiality or a minor. We also make, while we're mindful of the fact that there could be profanity and there may be images of loss of life, circumstances of blood, and just the types of outcomes that can be very graphic. We warn viewers of that, but we don't redact those items. Now we are not gratuitous. I view and edit each one. And that's important too, as agencies go about this, and understanding that people inside the organization may want to position these videos as marketing and promoting certain themes or ideas. And you need to make sure that you do everything possible to counter that. We don't pass judgment on individuals that are involved. For instance, we don't call them, we don't list criminal histories. We don't talk about their past involvement in crime or other activities. And this has been a learning process that this has evolved over the last 3 years also, is understanding what is it the public's looking for and how can we best demonstrate transparency and what we know about investigation as it is today. It's been widely received very, very positively. It has been in some very controversial instances. I've released that video within days of the event because of just the significance of the public outcries. I know that other agencies across American policing have done the same, and I think it's found that's been a very effective strategy. Lastly, they have also served a tremendous asset to us for matters of training. Our own officers and agencies across the country will watch these vignettes, if for lack of a better term, and look and talk and begin conversations about the officer's actions, the offender's actions, witnesses, the complexities of events, and what occurred or what they view and think may have occurred, and what their strategies would have been, or how they mirror or would change and adopt. And I think that that's also been a good feedback loop for us in our performance. Lastly, issues of use of force policies in our organization have changed and evolved over these last 5 years. We've reintroduced that the use of deadly force is not just objectively reasonable, but must be necessary.
Okay.
Rendering aid, interceding, and all types of other aspects of our policy as it's evolved. These uses of force vignettes or these critical incidents have reinforced the fact that you see people mirroring or modeling that behavior. And I think that goes further to reinforcing the conduct by our people.
Great, I like it. Yeah, Chief Ramsey, I'm going to let you have the last word on present day issues, but I'm going to ask you a tougher one about the protests and demonstrations that have occurred. I don't know how many or what happened in Wichita, but have you had protests and demonstrations and other kinds of activities, and have BWCs helped you along those lines?
Yeah, interestingly enough, we have our share of protests, but we haven't had violent protests in many years. And one of the issues we ran into was with the helmets the officers had. We didn't have the proper mounting device. That was our first protest where officers took bottles and rocks. I really wanted to share that with people to show what the officers were facing. And I was there, and I remember the sound of the water bottles hitting the shields and the rocks hitting the shields. But unfortunately, those cameras ended up mounting them on their lapel and they slid forward. So a lot of the view we get is just the ground and the bottles, you can see them skidding across the ground. So again, the importance of having the proper equipment for all occasions was a lesson learned. There was a few that provided some good footage, but by the time we got the right mounts, the worst of the protests were over. So a lesson learned for us on that. But but still helpful nonetheless.
Sure. Okay, let's move to the future in our remaining time. And here, I'm curious about how and in what way you see body-worn cameras for the future. What kinds of things would you like in terms of technology? What kinds of directions are your officers going to go in terms of the footage and behaviors, things of that nature? I'll start with you, Chief Moore. What do you think?
So
There you go.
the most critical aspect of this is auto activation. I believe that the ability to synchronize the turning on of the device during a critical incident is officers have a lot on their plate, and in these critical, complex, and sudden instances, people say, well, muscle memory, just activate the camera, and it's not that simple, especially in persons in one of the most stressful events of their life. And so we're working currently with our vendor, and I know other manufacturers are pursuing means of which to activate the device or have the device in a static mode where it can be available despite the officer not manually starting it. Lastly, I want to thank we see the evolution of this field by our vendors, because we went from a 30-second pre-activation buffer to a 2-minute buffer. And that has helped us tremendously in these instances where in a sudden instance, the officer forgets or fails to activate or thinks that they did, and it wasn't actually activated. And that's allowed us to have at least a video portion of it. So the evolution of the product is, I think, the most critical area. Lastly, is we need to develop a government web. There's been an earlier initiative about 7 years ago, and it was a DOJ and a Justice initiative. Storage of these images is our most costly aspect of the operation of the body-worn camera. And that's not just unique to body-worn video captures and digital in-car video, but digital evidence today is the largest burden, I believe, of law enforcement in the criminal justice system. And establishing a government, if you will, silo or net that would be federalized, so that local agencies, some 17,000, would not have the burden of paying frankly the maintenance of this of the storage of this. And frankly, the federal government could then have uniform standards. It could ensure data integrity. I think there's benefits to this, and I think it's a scale and size to help agencies, large and small, deal with one of the most pressing and I think highest obstacles to further expansion or even utilization of this important technology.
Great. Nick, how about your smaller agencies? What do you think? Go ahead.
So our biggest issue was battery life at the very beginning. A lot of our agencies, I think a good majority of them, they have 12-hour shifts. And with the camera that we bought last year, I mean, we were only really guaranteed 10 hours, and sometimes that would be 8 if there was a long duration of a footage during a call. Fortunately, our vendor just came out with a new camera that allows you to field swap the batteries. So hopefully that concern has kind of been put on the wayside. But another thing that we have to kind of look forward to is that most of our agencies decided to store all of their data on-prem and all their video. And what we kind of worry about is that if the future, if the back-end client where this footage is uploaded to, if it is to upgrade, are our agencies going to be able to run that system on the storage systems that they already bought? Because who knows? I mean, first of all, this technology is so new, relatively speaking. Ferguson happened in our backyard in 2014, and it feels like that was a big rallying cry to get body-worn cameras in the community. And so who knows where really this technology is going to go. But being with the smaller departments, there is a little bit of a concern, at least at the start, that are we purchasing what we need for now, or do we need to look to the future? But the answer to that is, well, we don't know what this is going to look like in the future. So we just did our best, and we believe that we did our homework to make sure that the equipment they purchased and the server specs were all good to go for them.
Okay. And Chief Ramsey, you've got the last word here. We're running out of time, unfortunately, but please, what do you think?
Well, along the lines of Chief Moore, more automation, automatic turn on, as well as, something that automatically populates the fields of the labeling in the body worn camera. Somehow connecting it more with CAD so that information just populates the data fields versus having an officer have to enter it. We keep asking our officers to do more and more, and it'd be nice to utilize the technology to take a little off their plate. I know there's some work on that, and we hope to see that in the very near future.
Okay. So we're running out of time. I know. I want to just thank you, each of you, Chief Moore, Chief Ramsey, and Mr. Murphy. I'm going to turn this over to John Markovic. I think there's some final words and maybe some last questions that we may have. I'm not sure. Go ahead, John.
Well, I'm going to squeeze in one question that we got submitted beforehand. You mentioned, it's hard to get the officers to absorb more. The question came from Illinois, where they're putting in, well, there's legislation that's going to require body-worn cameras of all agencies. And the question is, what does it take in terms of persons within the department, within the prosecutor's office, et cetera? How many more people do you have to add to handle body-worn cameras? Or is it reasonable to assume that you'll just absorb that with your current staffing and give up other things or just grin and bear it? So if you can briefly address what each of you did in that regard.
So this is a question about both manpower and storage and all kinds of things related to the criminal justice system too. And I know part of what we're doing with the program is looking very broadly at how body-worn camera footage is used through the police department, through the criminal justice system. And part of our effort is to see what the numbers look like, what the workflow looks like, and how difficult or easy it might be to review footage. I think that's one of the major concerns right now, especially within prosecutor offices, where again, the policies differ in terms of how and in what way they look at footage. In some jurisdictions, they have to look at all the investigative footage, and others they don't. And then they have to pass them on to the public defenders and defense attorneys because of discovery rules. There's a lot of, unfortunately, unanswered questions with respect to all of that. I know in LA, we've talked with the DA there, and they certainly have tried to get a process going, but they certainly don't have the manpower to review every investigative piece of footage and other issues too. I think that's the case in other jurisdictions, if I'm not mistaken. Nick, are you having that same kind of problem? Or how does the DA handle things in your county?
So obviously ours is a bit different. We have dedicated for each of our agencies, since they're different municipality, they have their dedicated prosecutors, they have their dedicated public defender. However, the county court system kind of could overrule all of them as well. And at this point, we've just really been working with the municipal parts, because our departments are so small that really we haven't even honestly had the release of a video of an incident quite yet.
Okay.
But we have the structure in place if we wanted to do so. But just with the, like I said, the size of our departments, especially under 50, it's tough to say, because you can just have one real prosecutor in the city or in the municipality, just kind of focus on all that. So I don't feel like I'm bringing up very good insight here on this one.
No, that's fine. That is insight that the problem's not as great. I think that's good to know. Chief Ramsey, what do you think?
I can tell you the prosecutors had more time on specific cases because they had to watch all the video. Took up more time on their part. Some of the other things was initially they wanted us to make copies of the videos for them versus having the direct download. We eventually got them to go to that. And then our public defenders didn't have the bandwidth to get the videos. So we helped them get the bandwidth. We also helped the public defenders with laptops. They're
Okay.
tremendously underfunded here in Kansas. So we helped them out with some funding.
Wow, very good. Chief Moore, do you want to comment on that at all?
I think I think it's Dr. Your research on this, I think, is important. The back office personnel as well as logistics and the ripple effect of this on the entire criminal justice system, that you now have a breadth of most agencies across American policing, vast majority have less than 100 personnel. So this could be something that's incidental and not a broad and significant impact that can be handled on a more manual basis. Larger agencies where things become much more higher reps and sets, I think that's where you see a burden that you have to recognize it, and you have to. I use the analogy, that you get the printer for free, but it's the ink that drives you up a wall. So I think that's the cost, and I think the back office cost of body worn, it's worth understanding. It's important to scale it, and it's also recognizing that in public agencies today, doing more with less is a problem. So don't start this if you can't support it, because the public expectation is that you're going to use it and that you're going to be able to account for its use. And so you need to make sure the investment is more than just the device. And now lastly, close in LA. Los Angeles, to give you some figures, we spend about $12.5 million a year in ongoing costs to maintain our system. Now that sounds like a lot because we're a big agency. It comes out to about $1,800 an officer across the 7,000 devices. And so I think that's where you can probably scale to understand it, but that's just the cost of the device, the storage. That doesn't talk about the infrastructure to set it up, and it doesn't certainly cost the personnel it takes to monitor and use all that data that you've got captured for various uses that are necessary in policing today.
That number confirms what John Markovic has been talking about, $2,000 or so per camera per officer. And that's what BJA standard in terms of funding, et cetera, too. So that's great to know, Chief, frankly. I'm happy to hear that. So I'm going to turn this back to Chip, I believe, to end this, and thank you all.
Let me chime in quickly.
Okay.
And I'll close it out. Chip, first of all, I want to thank the CNA staff that put this together. Emma, sort of controlling things behind the scenes, Jessica Dockstetter, and Rachel Johnston, who's managing the whole TTA endeavor, and of course Chip, who works closely with them and manages them. I think we can do a whole new webinar on the cost implications and the staffing implementations of BWC, and we'll do that. And so, just pay attention to the grant solicitations that are going to come out. We answered a question in chat about what it takes to qualify to be a grant, and as Emma posted, this event, this webinar is recorded, so share it with your colleagues. I think we learned a lot today, and I think we have a lot of ideas for future products and future webinars. Thanks to the panelists. Thanks to everybody who attended. Thanks to my boss, Kristen, for leading us off. Appreciate it all. Thank you.